On the night of January 6th, 1982, a blizzard swept across the Rocky Mountains of Colorado. Temperatures plunged to 20 degrees below zero. Snow buried the roads. Visibility collapsed to almost nothing. And somewhere on a frozen mountain pass, a man's pickup truck was stuck in a snowdrift. He had been flashing his headlights in Morse code. SOS. A sheriff aboard a passing commercial jetliner spotted the signal from the sky. A rescue team was dispatched. When Fire Chief Dave Montoya reached the truck, the man inside looked at him and said, "Oh God, I'm saved." Montoya noticed a fresh cut above the man's eye, a bruise darkening his face. The man said he had slipped and hit his head on his truck. The rescuers accepted the explanation and drove him to safety. They had no idea what he had done, because hours earlier, that same man had murdered 2 women, and the mountain had nearly swallowed the evidence, the killer, and any hope of justice, all in one night. It would take 39 years to learn the truth. This is the story of how 2 women vanished from a ski town on the same frozen evening, and how a pair of orange socks would eventually connect their deaths to the man who was rescued from the snow. Breckenridge, Colorado, 1982. To understand what happened here, you have to understand this place. Breckenridge sits at roughly 9,600 feet in Summit County, about 60 miles southwest of Denver. In the early 80s, it was a mountain ski town in every sense. Small, rugged, beautiful. A main street lined with false front buildings from the mining era, shops selling ski gear, a handful of bars where locals gathered after the lifts closed. Beyond the town, the landscape was immense. Forests of spruce and pine climbed the mountainsides. Frozen creeks carved through narrow valleys. And Highway 9 wound south over Hoosier Pass, 11,542 feet at its summit, the highest paved pass on the Continental Divide. On the other side lay the small communities of Alma and Fairplay, tucked into the high plateau of South Park. In 1982, these mountain towns were home to a transient mix of ski resort workers, miners, outdoors enthusiasts, and young people chasing the mountain lifestyle. Many of them did not own cars. Public transportation was limited, and so hitchhiking was not just common. It was the primary way people got around. Standing on the side of Highway 9 with your thumb out was as ordinary as catching a bus in any city. Nobody thought twice about it. Locals picked up locals. Strangers picked up strangers. It was simply how life worked at 10,000 feet in the Colorado Rockies. That culture of trust would prove fatal. Annette Kay Schnee was 21 years old. She had come to Breckenridge the way many young people did in those years, drawn to the mountains and the freedom they promised. She worked as a housekeeper at a local Holiday Inn and picked up shifts as a cocktail waitress. She dreamed of becoming a flight attendant. Her family described her as warm, bright, full of plans for a future she was only beginning to imagine. Her sisters, Cindy and Karen, adored her. On the afternoon of January 6th, Annette left work, visited a doctor, and then hitchhiked to a drugstore in Breckenridge to pick up medication. She was last seen at approximately 4:30 in the afternoon, standing somewhere along the road, looking for a ride. The blizzard was building. The temperature was dropping fast. She needed to get home. Someone stopped for her. Barbara Oberholtzer, known to everyone as Bobbie Jo, was 29 years old. Originally from the Midwest, she and her husband Jeff had moved to the mountains and settled in Alma, the small town on the south side of Hoosier Pass. Jeff ran an appliance repair business. Bobbie Jo worked as a receptionist for a local real estate company. They were a well-liked couple with a comfortable life built around the rhythms of mountain living. Bobbie Jo had a daughter named Jackie from a previous relationship, about 11 years old at the time. Her sister Lori later said that one of the best things that ever happened in her life was being Bobbie Jo's younger sister. On the evening of January 6th, Bobbie Jo went out with friends to a pub in Breckenridge. At 6:21 that evening, she called Jeff and told him she would be home relatively soon. She said she had a ride. Hitchhiking over Hoosier Pass in a blizzard was dangerous, but it was what people did. Nobody thought it would kill you. At approximately 7:50, Bobbie Jo left the pub. She stepped out into the bitter cold, looking for that ride home over the pass. Someone stopped for her, too. When Bobbie Jo did not come home that night, Jeff knew something was terribly wrong. He organized a search party the following morning. On January 7th, at approximately 3 in the afternoon, searchers found her. Bobbie Jo's body lay in a snowbank roughly 400 feet from the summit of Hoosier Pass. She was fully clothed. A zip tie had been fastened around one of her wrists. She had been shot twice at close range. Near her body, investigators recovered her driver's license, her backpack, a wool glove stained with blood, and a tissue also spotted with blood, and one other item that seemed out of place. A single orange bootie. It did not belong to Bobbie Jo. Bobbie Jo had fought. Her husband Jeff had made her a brass keyring as a self-defense tool. She used it. She struck her attacker in the face, hard enough to draw blood. That blood soaked into her glove and the tissue. It would sit in evidence storage for nearly 4 decades. But one day it would speak. After Bobbie Jo's body was found, the investigation focused on the most statistically likely suspect, her husband. Jeff Oberholtzer was questioned extensively. Investigators found his business card in another woman's jacket pocket, a detail that deepened their suspicion. He provided a false alibi, which only made things worse. But Jeff passed 2 polygraph tests, and in time, DNA testing would exclude him entirely. Still, the damage was done. For years, he lived under a cloud of suspicion from both authorities and the court of public opinion. It was very painful, he later said, being suspected not only by authorities but tried in the court of public opinion. Meanwhile, Annette Schnee had simply vanished. For 6 agonizing months, her family waited. Her sister Cindy was only 11 years old. She watched her mother break down day after day, not knowing whether Annette was alive or dead. There was no body, no evidence, no answers. Just silence and snow and the terrible uncertainty that eats a family alive. Then, on July 3rd, 1982, a young boy out fishing along Sacramento Creek in rural Park County, roughly 23 miles south of Breckenridge, made a discovery. Annette's body, partially submerged in the stream. She had been there since January. The autopsy revealed she had been shot once in the back, the bullet entering at a downward angle of about 30 degrees, consistent with being shot while running downhill, away from her killer toward the water. Her shoes were on the wrong feet. Her jeans had a broken zipper. The evidence suggested she may have been sexually assaulted before she was killed. And on her left foot, she wore a single orange bootie, a Christmas gift from her mother. That orange bootie changed everything. Former Colorado Bureau of Investigation agent Jim Hartke attended Annette's autopsy. When he saw the orange bootie on her foot, something clicked. He later recalled, "On her left foot, I noticed an orange bootie. And in my mind, I'm remembering the orange bootie that was found at the top of Hoosier Pass." So it tied the two together. 2 women, 2 separate disappearances on the same day. 2 murders hours apart committed during the same blizzard. And a pair of matching orange socks that proved they had been inside the same vehicle. DNA testing years later confirmed it. Annette's DNA was found on the inside of the orange sock recovered from Bobbie Jo's crime scene. Bobbie Jo's DNA was found on the outside. The theory was that Annette lost her bootie in the killer's truck during her abduction. Hours later, when Bobbie Jo fought back and was thrown or jumped from the vehicle, the bootie was kicked out with her. 1 killer, 2 victims, the same frozen night. But despite this extraordinary connection, the case went cold. Investigators had no DNA database match, no viable suspect. The years began to accumulate. Detectives retired. Leads dried up. The case files went into boxes, and the boxes went onto shelves, and the mountain snow fell and melted and fell again, year after year, for nearly 4 decades. What investigators did not know, what they could not have known without the technology that did not yet exist, was that the man who killed both women had been in their hands that very night. The man rescued from the snowdrift on Guanella Pass. The man with the bruise on his face. His name was Lee Phillips. Phillips had lived in the area for years. He was a miner who worked at the Henderson mine and operated his own mechanic shop in Dumont, a small mountain town roughly an hour from Breckenridge. He was familiar with the roads, the passes, and the culture of hitchhiking that connected these isolated communities. And he had done this, McQuote, before. In 1973, 9 years before the murders, Phillips picked up a female hitchhiker outside Breckenridge. He drove her to a remote cabin off a county road, dragged her from his vehicle, and beat her head with a rock. The woman screamed for him to stop and told him she had a baby girl. Phillips relented. He broke into the cabin, cleaned her up, and dropped her off in Fairplay. She went straight to the police. Phillips was arrested and confessed to the entire attack. He was convicted of assault and burglary and served approximately 6 months in jail. 6 months. And then he was free again, living in the same mountains, driving the same roads, passing the same hitchhikers. 9 years later, he would kill 2 of them in a single night. Here is what investigators believe happened on January 6, 1982. Sometime around 4:30 in the afternoon, Phillips picked up Annette Schnee, who was hitchhiking in or near Breckenridge. He drove her roughly 23 miles south into the remote terrain of Park County. At some point, Annette tried to run. She fled downhill toward Sacramento Creek. Phillips shot her once in the back. He left her body near the stream, where it would remain hidden by snow and ice for 6 months. Sometime around 7:50 that evening, Phillips encountered Bobbie Jo Oberholtzer hitchhiking from the pub in Breckenridge toward her home in Alma. He offered her a ride over Hoosier Pass. At or near the summit, something went wrong. Bobbie Jo may have sensed the danger. She fought. She struck Phillips in the face with the brass keyring her husband had made for her, drawing blood that soaked into her glove. Phillips restrained her with a zip tie. He shot her twice at close range. He left her body in a snowbank near the top of the pass. Then, driving through the blizzard, Phillips became stuck, his truck buried in a snowdrift on Guanella Pass. He signaled for help with his headlights. A rescue team arrived. Fire Chief Dave Montoya, who knew Phillips from mining work, pulled him from the truck. He later recalled, "There he was in his little pickup, and he saw me and said, 'Oh God, I'm saved.'" Phillips later appeared in local news coverage of his dramatic rescue, telling reporters, "You find out how lonely it is really quick. The irony is almost unbearable. The authorities saved the man who had just committed a double murder. He went home. He went back to work. He lived freely for nearly 40 years. The case haunted the families. The Schnee family hired a private researcher." Jeff Oberholtzer endured decades of whispered suspicion despite his innocence. In 2005, an anonymous tip to Crime Stoppers mentioned the name Alan Phillips, but the lead went nowhere. The case remained cold. The evidence sat in storage. The blood on Bobbie Jo's glove waited in a sealed bag, holding a secret that no one yet had the technology to read. Then the science caught up. In early 2020, Detective Sergeant Wendy Kipple of the Park County Sheriff's Office began exploring the rapidly advancing field of forensic genetic genealogy. Traditional DNA matching requires the suspect's profile to already exist in a law enforcement database. If the suspect has never been arrested for a qualifying offense, their DNA is not on file. Alan Phillips had served his 6 months in 1973, long before DNA databases existed. His profile was nowhere. But genetic genealogy takes a different approach. Crime scene DNA is uploaded to public genealogy databases where ordinary citizens have voluntarily submitted their DNA for ancestry research. The system identifies partial matches with distant relatives. Genealogists then build family trees, generation by generation, narrowing the field until only one name remains. The Schnee family had also been pushing for answers. They hired researcher Charlie McCormick, who partnered with United Data Connect, a Denver-based forensic genealogy service. Working with DNA from the blood on Bobbie Jo's glove, the genealogist went to work. On January 9th, 2021, 39 years after the murders, the genealogy database returned two names: Alan Phillips and his brother, Bruce Phillips. Bruce had never lived in Colorado. Alan had lived there for decades. Detective Kipple began digging, and what she found was staggering. Alan Lee Phillips was still alive. He still lived in the area. He had worked at the Henderson mine for years. He operated his own mechanic shop. And he was the same man who had been rescued from a snowdrift on the night of the murders in 1982. A 5-week surveillance operation began. Investigators followed Phillips, waiting for him to discard something that carried his DNA: a napkin, a coffee cup, a piece of trash. Eventually, Phillips threw away a bag from a Sonic restaurant. Inside was a napkin with his saliva. The DNA was tested against the blood on Bobbie Jo's glove. The match was confirmed. The odds of it being anyone other than Alan Lee Phillips were 1 in 17 quadrillion. On February 24th, 2021, Alan Lee Phillips was arrested during a traffic stop near his home in Clear Creek County. He was 70 years old. He had lived as a free man for 39 years, 1 month, and 18 days after killing Annette Schnee and Bobbie Jo Oberholtzer. The trial began on August 31st, 2022, in Fairplay, Colorado, Park County, the same remote mountain county where both women had been found dead 4 decades earlier. The prosecution laid out the evidence: the DNA match, the orange sock connection, the rescue from the snowdrift, the bruise on Phillips' face that matched the injury Bobbie Jo inflicted with her brass keyring. The defense argued that the DNA evidence had been contaminated and mishandled. They attempted to redirect suspicion toward Jeff Oberholtzer, the husband who had already been cleared by DNA years earlier. Detective Sergeant Kipple testified about Bobbie Jo's final moments. "She was a fighter," Kipple said, "and without her being a fighter, we would not have the DNA that we needed to solve this case." On September 15th, 2022, after 4 hours and 45 minutes of deliberation, the jury returned its verdict: guilty on all 8 counts: 2 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of felony murder, 2 counts of kidnapping, and additional charges. Alan Lee Phillips had been found guilty of destroying 2 lives on a single frozen night 40 years earlier. At the sentencing hearing on November 2nd, 2022, the families finally spoke. Cindy French, Annette's sister, who had been just 11 years old when her sister disappeared, told the court about the weight she had carried her entire life. I felt like I made everyone sad, she said. She described watching her mother break down during the 6 months before Annette's body was found. She had named her eldest daughter after Annette. He took a really good person away from this world, she said, and it saddens me that we will never get to know how she was when she was 30, or when she was 40 or 50. Jackie Vukos Walker, Bobbie Jo's daughter, spoke of a childhood shaped by grief. She described years of depression and anxiety. She avoided relationships with other children because she did not want to explain her loss. She cried into a horse embroidered pillow. She said that to this day, any mention of serial killers on television triggers an emotional response she cannot control. Karen Riason, Annette's sister, said simply, "Truthfully, I did not think it would happen in my lifetime." Judge Stephen Broom sentenced Alan Lee Phillips to 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Consecutive, not concurrent. 1 life sentence for each woman, because each life taken deserved to be recognized individually. The judge told the families, "I hope the healing starts today, and God be with you." Jeff Oberholtzer, after 40 years of suspicion and suffering, said, "I cannot thank enough all who never gave up the search for the truth." On February 27th, 2023, approximately 6 months after his conviction, Alan Lee Phillips died at the Arkansas Valley Correctional Facility in Ordway, Colorado. He was 72 years old. The coroner stated that foul play was not suspected. This case asks a question that has no comfortable answer. How does a man commit a violent assault in 1973, serve 6 months, return to the same mountains, and kill 2 women in 1982, all while living openly in the same community for 4 decades? How does he get rescued by the very authorities who should have caught him on the very night of the murders, with a bruise on his face from his victim's last act of defiance, and simply drive away? The answer is that evil does not always announce itself. Sometimes it lives quietly. It works at the mine. It fixes cars. It drives the same mountain roads as everyone else. And it waits for the vulnerable moment, for the blizzard, for the outstretched thumb, for the trust that holds small communities together. Annette Schnee was 21. She wanted to be a flight attendant. She was standing in the cold, trying to get home. Bobbie Jo Oberholtzer was 29. She had called her husband to say she would be home soon. Neither of them ever made it, but Bobbie Jo fought. She struck her killer in the face and left his blood on her glove. That blood waited in evidence for 39 years. And when the science finally existed to read it, it spoke her killer's name. Without her being a fighter, Detective Kipple said, we would not have the DNA we needed. 2 women, 2 lives, 1 frozen night, and a pair of orange socks that refused to let the truth stay buried.